What if the most glamorous night in Hollywood became the moment a global celebrity realized the entire industry had quietly turned its back on her? What if a woman who once commanded global attention arrived at a star-studded event expecting applause and instead heard the words, "What are you doing here?" Not in anger, not in curiosity, but in a low, cold whisper dripping with disbelief. That's where our story begins. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The 2025 Governor Awards. A night of elegance, legacy, and Hollywood royalty. A night when every A-lister walks in knowing exactly who they are, exactly where they stand, and exactly how the cameras will treat them. Except one. Meghan Markle. She arrived believing this would be her redemption arc. Her triumphant re-entry into the elite spaces she always believed she belonged to. Her moment to shine again. Not as a duchess, not as a runaway royal, not as a controversial personality, but as Meghan, the Hollywood figure, the woman who once dreamed of walking red carpets and owning the spotlight. But this wasn't just any red carpet. This was Hollywood's most unforgiving mirror, and the reflection staring back at her was nothing like she expected. Before we dive into the chaos that unfolded, let me ask you something. Have you ever stepped into a room convinced it would be the beginning of something incredible, only to instantly feel like you didn't belong? Have you ever rehearsed the moment in your head 1,000 times, imagined the applause, the validation, the respect, only to be met with nothing but silence? That's what hit Meghan the moment her SUV rolled up to the venue. Nothing. No camera flashes. No cheers. No surge of photographers calling her name. Just silence. A silence so loud it felt like a slap. Her publicist, sitting beside her, glanced at her with that nervous half-smile PR people use when they're hoping everything will magically go right, despite knowing it probably won't. Outside the window, the velvet ropes glowed under the golden lights. Celebrities posed. Photographers screamed names. Assistants scrambled. And Meghan, dressed in a custom gown designed to dominate every camera shot, was waiting for her cue. But the cue never came. She stepped out anyway. Because what was she going to do? Sit inside the car until someone noticed her? No. Meghan was determined. This was her night. Her narrative. Her comeback. Or so she thought. The moment she stepped onto the carpet, a few heads turned, but not the ones she expected. Not photographers. Not industry powerhouses. Just curious attendees wondering why someone was approaching the red carpet from the wrong direction. Yes, wrong direction. That was the first mistake. Meghan didn't realize that arriving through the wrong entry point at the Governor Awards was like walking into a theater through the emergency exit. It wasn't illegal, but everyone noticed. And not in a good way. Still, she kept moving, chin high, smile warm, posing as if she was being photographed even though no one had lifted a camera. Her smile stiffened. Her steps slowed. She waited for someone, anyone, to call her name. But the cameras didn't move. Because the photographers weren't confused. They weren't distracted. They were ignoring her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. And Meghan felt that truth sink in slowly, like cold water sliding down her spine. Here's where the night takes its first dramatic turn. A staffer, one of the assistants hired for the event, walked directly into her path. He wasn't rude. He wasn't aggressive. He simply held up a hand and said something that would haunt Meghan for the rest of the night. This area is reserved. Reserved. For invited nominees. For honorees. For Hollywood insiders. Not for her. But Meghan wasn't just shocked. She was offended. In her mind, she belonged everywhere celebrities did. She was the woman who had once stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The woman who had Oprah's number. The woman who had dined with presidents. How could a staffer, an assistant, tell her she didn't belong? And that's when the second blow landed. A whisper. A voice behind her. Cold. Sharp. Dismissive. What are you doing here? She spun around. But the voice had already melted back into the crowd. Someone recognized her. Someone wasn't impressed. Was it a producer? An actor? A director? A studio executive? No one knows. But Meghan heard it. And others heard it too. And that whisper spread like perfume in the air, subtle, but impossible to ignore. You're not supposed to be here. But Meghan kept pushing forward. She thought all she needed was one good angle. One good pose. One moment where a photographer blinked and realized, oh, it's Meghan Markle. The story would fix itself. The coverage would roll in. The tabloids would eat it up. But the moment never came. Instead, something far worse happened. As she walked toward a cluster of photographers, she prepared her signature pose. Chin forward, shoulders relaxed, hands delicately clasped. She gave a soft smile, ready for the shutters. But the photographers didn't lift their cameras. Not even one. In fact, they turned their lenses away. Imagine that. Imagine being known globally. Imagine having millions of followers. Imagine believing the world is always watching you, and then looking into a sea of cameras that move away the moment you step into frame. One photographer even stepped back to avoid capturing her accidentally. The humiliation hit her like a tidal wave. Her smile wavered. Her chest tightened. A small sting formed at the corner of her eye. But she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. She kept walking, pretending she was part of the event, pretending she had a slot on the photo schedule, pretending she wasn't being gently ushered away from every camera angle she tried to join. But internally, panic was rising. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Her team had hinted to several outlets that she might make a surprise appearance. They had pitched the idea that Meghan was returning to her Hollywood roots. They expected headlines praising her elegance, her glamour, her confidence. Instead, the headlines would be brutal. But not yet. Right now, in this moment, she was still walking, slowly, toward another potential photo cluster. Her publicist whispered, "Smile. It'll work out. It always works out." Except this time, it wouldn't. Because that's when the third blow arrived. A small blacklist. Hollywood has rules. Unspoken, unseen, but very real. The Governor Awards works on a pre-approved photography list. It's the equivalent of a VIP ranking system. If your name isn't on the list, the photographers are told not to waste their time. It's not personal. It's strategic. And Meghan's name? It wasn't there. Why? Whose decision was it? Who kept her off the list? That's the mystery that would unravel over the rest of the night. But let's go back to Meghan's face in this moment. Because here's where her emotions finally cracked. As she reached a third photography area, she saw it, a cluster of flashbulbs exploding for another celebrity. A rising actress. Younger. Fresh-faced. With a hit show and a studio backing her. Meghan stepped closer, and a security guard subtly shifted between them. Not aggressively. Just enough to create a boundary. A boundary Meghan wasn't allowed to cross. That's when the first tear formed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sob. It was a silent, desperate tear. She blinked away quickly before anyone could interpret it as weakness. But someone did see it. And that someone powerful. Someone whose recognition should have been a blessing. Instead, they turned away. Not maliciously. Not dramatically. Just disinterested. And that hurt more than any insult. Because indifference is colder than hatred. Indifference is the death of relevance. Still, Meghan pushed forward. Because that's what she does when she's cornered. She pushes. She reinvents. She tries again, and again, and again. But the final humiliation of the introduction is the one that sets the entire story into motion. A reporter, credentialed, seasoned, unflappable, glanced at Meghan as she approached the press section. He didn't raise his microphone. He didn't ask her a question. He didn't even pretend to care. Instead, he turned to a colleague and whispered, loud enough for her to hear. "She's not on the list. Not on the list." Those 4 words broke her. Because if she wasn't on the list, she wasn't part of the night. She wasn't part of the coverage. She wasn't part of the Hollywood narrative. She wasn't supposed to be there. And this wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't chaos. This was calculated. By who? And why? That is where our chapters begin. Because what happened next? What happened when Meghan tried to reclaim control, when the staff intervened again, when a whisper turned into a rumor, and when an industry silently decided she was no longer one of them? Well, what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The moment the sleek black SUV rolled up to the steps of the Governor Awards, the world didn't know that it carried more than a celebrity. It carried expectation, ambition, and perhaps the heaviest sense of anticipation Meghan Markle had felt in years. She had prepared for this night for months. Not with a stylist, not with a publicist, not even with a PR team. She had prepared herself. Every step, every smile, every glance rehearsed in her mind. Every possibility played out. The photographers shouting her name, the flashes capturing her elegance, the murmurs of admiration from the Hollywood elite. She had imagined this moment endlessly, and now, at last, it had arrived. Or so she thought. The crowd at the red carpet was a mixture of elite nominees, previous award winners, influencers, and journalists. The lights reflected off designer gowns, the air buzzing with a low hum of expectation, champagne glasses clinking, laughter and chatter weaving together into a symphony of wealth and celebrity. It was the perfect stage for someone who thrived on attention, and Meghan had every intention of owning it. Every inch of her posture screamed confidence. Chin raised, shoulders back, eyes scanning the crowd with quiet determination. The custom gown hugged her frame flawlessly, the subtle shimmer catching every flash that, she believed, would soon come her way. Yet the first signal of trouble arrived the instant she stepped out of the car. Not the whispers, not the stares, not even the slight hesitation of an overworked staffer. No, the first sign that this night was not going to go according to plan was the silence. The red carpet, normally alive with photographers calling names and attendees vying for their moment in the lens, was oddly muted in her direction. Cameras pointed elsewhere. Voices avoided her. The buzz seemed to hum around her rather than include her. Her publicist leaned in, whispering what she had been repeating for months. "Smile, Meghan. It'll all be fine. Just keep walking. Just keep moving. One shot at a time." But even those words, meant to reassure, fell flat. She could feel the tension knotting her stomach. The rehearsed confidence that had carried her through countless public events now faltered at the edges. She had expected this moment to be smooth, triumphant even, but from the second she hit the red carpet, something felt off. The energy of the crowd, the camera flashes, the photographers' positions. It all signaled a subtle rejection, a quiet dismissal that she couldn't ignore. And yet, Meghan pressed on. She had come too far to let the first sign of awkwardness stop her. Each step toward the photographers was deliberate, purposeful. She raised a hand, preparing to acknowledge flashes, prepared to cue the smile that had launched 1,000 headlines. She looked poised, in control, but the reaction she received was the opposite of what she anticipated. The photographers, dozens of them in organized chaos, pointed their cameras away, adjusting angles so as to avoid capturing her. The moment she stepped fully into frame, the lenses shifted slightly, deliberately, to exclude her. Imagine it, a sea of cameras, all turned away. A room of people who normally celebrated glamour and elegance, now acting as if she didn't exist. Her carefully rehearsed smile flickered and almost broke. Her pulse quickened. She tried to move with grace, to project authority and charm, but every instinct screamed at her that something was very wrong. This wasn't a momentary oversight, it was systemic. A quiet, organized distancing. She wasn't just ignored. She was made invisible. And then it came. The first whisper. She didn't even need to hear it clearly. She felt it in the air, in the way heads subtly turned and then looked away. A voice, soft, deliberate, and dripping with judgment, slipped into her ear. "What are you doing here?" Not shouted, not confrontational, just there, hanging in the air. The tone was lethal in its casualness, the kind of subtle, dismissive coldness that could cut deeper than any scream. It wasn't meant for public display, yet somehow, it carried. Meghan froze for a heartbeat, then spun slightly to locate the source. But the speaker had already melted back into the crowd, leaving only the whisper, the implication, the judgment. Her mind raced. Was it a staffer? A fellow celebrity? A producer? Someone who had the authority to make her presence on the carpet conditional? The ambiguity itself was devastating. She wasn't just being blocked. She was being assessed, judged, and quietly dismissed without clarity. In that instant, Meghan realized that this night, the night she had built up for months, the one she had imagined as a turning point in her public image, was already going sideways. And the deeper realization hit her like cold water. This wasn't an accident. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had made the decision that Meghan Markle would not dominate this space tonight. Still, she walked. Chin up, hands steady, smile forced but presentable. Every inch of her body screamed determination, a refusal to surrender. She approached the first cluster of photographers, the group she believed would capture the defining images of her night. But as she raised her hands, as she offered her most charismatic pose, the lenses didn't move. Not a single shutter clicked. The photographers, strategically positioned, simply turned away. One even stepped back as if to avoid an accidental shot. This wasn't random. It was meticulous, precise, and public in its subtlety. Meghan, experienced in navigating public attention, had never encountered this kind of orchestrated exclusion. Her publicist, sensing the shift in energy, attempted to redirect her, whispering strategies and instructions. But Meghan's heart sank. She realized she was navigating a battlefield she hadn't even known existed. The whispers of staff, the cold avoidance from photographers, the deliberate exclusion from camera angles. It was all a carefully constructed reality she hadn't anticipated. The carefully choreographed night she had imagined in her mind, with flashes of adoration and headlines praising her elegance, had collapsed in a matter of minutes. The first tear formed not with a dramatic sob, but silently. A microsecond of vulnerability she desperately tried to blink away before anyone noticed. The harsh reality pressed down. This wasn't about talent, charisma, or fame. This was politics, power, and a network of influence she had underestimated. The industry, the insiders, the very people she had hoped would elevate her profile, had decided, collectively and silently, that she wasn't welcome in their moment of glory. Meghan's mind reeled. How had it come to this? How had someone in the room, someone in the power structure, made a quiet decision to exclude her from validation, from recognition, from the spotlight she so desperately needed? And yet, despite the growing humiliation, she pressed forward. Every step was an act of defiance, every smile an effort to reclaim control. But even as she moved, the quiet whispers, the subtle avoidance, and the lack of acknowledgement painted a story louder than any photographer's flash. She tried to engage again, moving toward another set of photographers, another opportunity to reclaim some semblance of attention. Her hands poised, shoulders squared, smile bright, eyes scanning for any acknowledgement. But the strategic avoidance continued. Staff subtly intervened, moving just enough to maintain the barrier between her and the lens. It wasn't malicious in its delivery, but it was effective. Meghan felt the walls of invisibility closing in, a carefully crafted social barricade that left her isolated in plain sight. She was present, poised, elegant, but entirely unseen. And then the final, crushing blow of the introduction arrived. A reporter, seasoned, credentialed, unflappable, glanced at her as she approached. He didn't lift his microphone. He didn't call her name. He didn't even offer the slightest nod of recognition. Instead, he leaned to his colleague, quietly, deliberately. She's not on the list. 4 words. Simple, casual, devastating. Not a threat, not a rebuke, just a statement of fact. She wasn't invited. She wasn't approved. She wasn't part of the narrative. She wasn't supposed to be there. And that, more than the whisper, more than the cameras turned away, more than the staff interventions, was the moment Meghan realized the magnitude of the night's failure. This wasn't a simple oversight. This wasn't a fleeting embarrassment. This was an intentional, orchestrated exclusion. And it had begun the moment she stepped out of the SUV. The night was far from over. In fact, the real drama, the confrontation, the whispers, the rumors, the alliances and betrayals behind the velvet ropes, was only just beginning. But in this introduction, one truth became painfully clear. Meghan Markle, for all her poise, her elegance, her expectation of admiration, was stepping into a moment that would test her in ways she had never imagined. The cameras weren't just ignoring her. They were telling a story she couldn't yet see, a story that would unfold over the next several hours with consequences both public and deeply personal. And as the red carpet lights continued to glow, as the crowd moved around her, and as the whispers traveled through the room, Meghan realized something that would shape every step of the night. She had walked into a space where she was not just unwelcome, she was invisible. And the question that had been whispered in her ear at the start of the evening still lingered, hauntingly clear. What are you doing here? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The barricade wasn't physical, it was political. Those words would echo in Meghan Markle's mind for weeks after the Governor Awards. Because on that night, The red carpet wasn't just a path to cameras and recognition. It had become a labyrinth of subtle power plays, invisible rules, and silent gatekeepers who controlled who could be seen and who had to remain on the margins. And Meghan, for the first time in years, felt what it truly meant to be blocked. The moment she moved toward the main stretch of the red carpet, she noticed the first signs. Staffers, usually cordial and accommodating, subtly shifted in her path, creating what she initially thought were mere crowd control formations. She adjusted her stride, trying to maintain confidence, trying to convey the image she had rehearsed endlessly. Her gown shimmered under the lights, every step deliberate, calculated, poised. She was the picture of elegance. But elegance was meaningless if the audience refused to acknowledge it. A cluster of photographers had gathered near the center of the red carpet, focused on an actress who had just won a critical award. The flashes went off, the voices called names, the cameras zoomed in. Meghan took a step closer, hoping to capture just a fraction of that attention, to weave herself into the energy, to reclaim the narrative she had so carefully constructed in her mind. But as she approached, the photographers subtly angled their cameras away. Not all at once, but enough to send a message: you do not belong here. Her first instinct was disbelief. Surely, someone would step in. Surely, a colleague, a celebrity, or even a fellow royal acquaintance would notice her. Surely, this was a misunderstanding, a logistical error, a timing issue, something fixable. She pressed forward, her eyes scanning for any hint of validation. But each step revealed more subtle obstacles. Staffers positioned themselves between her and the camera clusters, politely, quietly, yet unmistakably signaling, "Stop. You cannot proceed." What Meghan was beginning to realize, and what most people outside that red carpet would never understand, was that Hollywood's social dynamics operated like a secret society. Invitations were not merely formalities. Access was carefully managed. Approval lists dictated who could appear in press photos, who could be interviewed, and who could be included in the narrative. Being on the red carpet was not just about arriving. It was about being acknowledged by the invisible powers that ran the event. And Meghan wasn't. Each attempt she made to step into frame was met with polite obstruction. Not a shove, not a confrontation, just a subtle, firm presence reminding her, "This space is not yours." A photographer adjusted a lens, seemingly innocuous, but the angle shifted ever so slightly, ensuring her image would not be captured. Another staffer walked past, blocking a direct line of sight. She smiled, tried to project poise, but internally, panic was rising. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surged, and a quiet rage began to simmer. Why was this happening? Who had the authority to silently deny her presence in such a public setting? The question swirled like storm clouds in her mind, and the red carpet, once a familiar stage of applause and attention, had transformed into a gauntlet of scrutiny and exclusion. Every footstep became a negotiation with invisible forces, every glance a test of her composure. She had prepared for the public, but she had not prepared for this silent resistance. And then came the whispers, not loud enough for everyone to hear, but clear enough for her to catch snippets. Staff talking quietly, performers murmuring among themselves, assistants exchanging knowing glances. She couldn't make out the full content, but the tone was unmistakable. She was noticed, yes, but with an edge of judgment. Approval was withheld. Permission denied. The subtle power structures were in motion, and Meghan found herself outside the circle of favor, standing on the edges of influence where no camera dared to follow. Her publicist leaned in, whispering advice that felt increasingly futile. "Keep moving," they urged. "Smile, it will all work out." But Meghan's smile was faltering. Her steps were slowing. The careful composure that had carried her through countless events seemed fragile, as if the night itself was conspiring to strip it away. For the first time, she realized that control wasn't something she could project through posture, gaze, or outfit. Control was being dictated by forces beyond her reach. The unseen architects of perception and visibility. And the more she advanced, the more obvious the obstruction became. A group of A-list actors, previously rumored to be friendly, moved in formation, subtly redirecting photographers, shielding certain angles, and creating pockets of exclusivity. It wasn't confrontational, but it was precise. Meghan noticed the patterns, The way bodies shifted, the way flashes were timed, the way access points were subtly manipulated. She understood immediately that this wasn't a mistake. It was orchestration, and the orchestrators were masterful. They had set the rules of the game before she arrived, and now, unknowingly, she had walked into it. She tried to negotiate. Not with words, there was no point, but with presence. Every step, every hand gesture, every carefully measured smile was intended to claim space. But the barricade, subtle yet unyielding, held firm. A polite staffer positioned themselves slightly in front of her. A photographer angled the lens away. Another stepped back. It was like a dance, except Meghan was the only one unaware of the choreography. The emotional toll began to rise. She had anticipated rejection from critics, from tabloids, from social media, but not from the living, breathing, physical space she had expected to command. She had believed the red carpet would be her arena, her chance to reclaim influence, to redirect the narrative. Instead, she was learning the harshest lesson Hollywood could teach. Visibility is granted, not demanded. And tonight, Meghan Markle's visibility had been revoked. She paused briefly near a cluster of lights, hoping that hesitation might draw attention, might allow a photographer to capture an accidental shot. But no, they continued as if she were invisible. The room seemed to hum around her, bustling with celebration, laughter, and movement, yet she was static, a figure excluded by design. She blinked, trying to hold back the first signs of tears, trying to maintain the image of control she had rehearsed endlessly. And then it escalated. A particularly experienced staffer, known for orchestrating media access at top-tier events, approached her calmly. Not aggressively, not with malice, but with precision. "I'm sorry, this area is restricted," they said, subtly gesturing toward the main press cluster. "Only approved nominees and honorees are permitted." Meghan's heart sank. She knew this wasn't random protocol. She had prepared for standard red carpet rules. She had expected some obstacles. But this was deliberate. She had been singled out, excluded from the very space that could legitimize her return to prominence. A whisper reached her ears simultaneously, faint but sharp. "She's not on the list." For words, spoken quietly by someone nearby, carried with them the weight of finality. The implication was inescapable. She was not merely blocked by staff or logistics. She was intentionally denied. And unlike public scrutiny, this exclusion was silent, efficient, and absolute. Meghan's mind raced. Who had made this decision? Why? How had they orchestrated it so carefully, ensuring that every attempt she made to insert herself into the coverage would fail? She thought about allies she had counted on, friends in the industry who had previously supported her, collaborators who had vouched for her. Were they complicit? Were they powerless? Or had the politics of Hollywood quietly shifted, leaving her without a single supporter in the room? Her steps slowed, her composure strained, and the weight of public expectation pressed down. She realized that this was more than a professional setback. It was an emotional one. Every rehearsal, every preparation, every strategic move she had imagined had collapsed under the subtle power dynamics of the room. And the longer she lingered, the more apparent it became. Tonight, she was not part of the event. Tonight, the Governor Awards had established its hierarchy, and she was deliberately placed outside of it. She tried to remind herself, this was temporary. Tomorrow, the narrative could be controlled, interviews could be scheduled, stories could be crafted. But tonight, in this moment, the public spectacle, the cameras, the flashes, the presence of industry giants, was denied to her. And that denial, silent as it was, carried an emotional sting far sharper than any tabloid headline. It was the ultimate form of social rejection, to be present yet invisible, to be dressed for success yet excluded from recognition. Her pulse raced. The audience, the celebrities, the media, all moving around her, all engaged, all participating in the event, were witnesses to her exclusion, even if unaware of its deliberate orchestration. Meghan's carefully rehearsed control was slipping, her nerves fraying, her sense of self questioned. She had walked into what she believed would be a triumphant return and instead found herself navigating a blockade built not of ropes and barriers, but of influence, access, and unspoken rules. And yet, she moved forward. One step, two steps. every motion an act of defiance, a refusal to surrender to the invisible forces controlling the night. She smiled, even as her eyes flickered with doubt. She posed, even as the flashes ignored her. She persisted, understanding intellectually that visibility might still be earned, but emotionally, the realization hit that she was alone, navigating a red carpet designed to exclude her. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest lesson of all, that in Hollywood, even glamour can be weaponized. Even beauty, even preparation, even poise, none of it mattered if those who controlled the narrative decided you did not belong. And as Meghan continued her careful, tentative walk along the carpet, one thought dominated her mind. This was just the beginning. But what came next would test her composure, her strategy, and her very sense of belonging. And no one could have predicted just how far the blockade would go. 40 cameras pointed one way, and absolutely none toward Meghan. It sounds impossible, absurd, unthinkable. Yet that's exactly what happened on the red carpet of the 2025 Governor Awards. Meghan Markle, poised, elegant, and dressed to dominate, walked toward the central cluster of photographers, expecting at least a flicker of recognition. She expected a click of a shutter, a voice calling her name, the validation that comes with being seen by an industry that thrives on visibility. Instead, silence. Not a single camera moved. Not one lens tilted, not one flash fired. It was as if she had walked into an invisible force field. Every step she took was met with deliberate avoidance. Photographers adjusted angles just enough to ensure she remained outside their frame. Some even leaned toward colleagues as she approached, whispering directions to subtly exclude her from the shot. It was professional, it was calculated, and it was devastating. Meghan's first reaction was disbelief. Surely, she thought, this must be a misunderstanding. Surely, these people, trained to capture moments of glamour, could not intentionally ignore her. She had walked red carpets before. She had handled paparazzi, interviews, press conferences. She had faced criticism, rumors, and public scrutiny. But this, the orchestrated exclusion, was a new level of humiliation. Her publicist was at her side, whispering quick instructions. Smile. Look to the left. Pose slightly forward. It'll be fine. Meghan forced the smile, lifted her chin, and attempted to project confidence. Every gesture was deliberate, every step controlled, a silent defiance against the invisible blockade. But internally, panic was building. The realization that the photographers were actively avoiding her was sinking in like a stone dropped into her chest. She tried to engage verbally, offering a soft, friendly greeting to one of the photographers. Nothing. Not a word. Not a glance. Not a hint that they acknowledged her presence. And that's when the emotional spike began, the subtle panic transforming into visible distress. She could feel it in her chest, in her shoulders, in the tightness around her throat. She wasn't just ignored, she was erased. Why? Who had made the decision? Was it a spontaneous choice by the photographers, or had someone instructed them in advance? The question swirled through her mind as she continued down the carpet, attempting to reclaim a foothold, attempting to assert herself in a space that had silently decided she did not belong. The dynamics of a red carpet event like this are invisible to the public eye. Most people think it's chaos, a swarm of photographers shouting names, capturing every moment. But the reality is highly controlled. Access is managed, approvals are given, lists are curated. There is an unspoken hierarchy. And Meghan had just been informed, without words, that she was not part of it. As she approached another cluster, her pulse quickened. She raised a hand in a gentle wave, hoping to signal recognition, hoping to capture a fleeting connection with a lens that might still snap her into relevance. But the movement only highlighted her exclusion. Photographers leaned away, adjusted their tripods, and refocused their attention elsewhere. It was as if she were a ghost, passing through their carefully composed world. And then came the murmur from the edge of the press cluster. She's not on the list. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they carried the weight of finality. It was not an opinion, not a suggestion, it was fact. She was not on the approved list of subjects for press coverage. The realization hit like a punch to the stomach. The night she had envisioned, the moment she had spent months planning, was slipping away. Her presence, her preparation, her poise. all meaningless against the invisible barrier of authority. She paused. For a fraction of a second, Meghan considered stepping back, retreating, walking away. But that was not her style. She had never been one to allow circumstance to dictate her narrative. She straightened her posture, forced her smile wider, and pressed forward, every step an act of defiance. Yet with each movement, the barrier grew more apparent, more deliberate, more absolute. And that's when the true emotional toll revealed itself. In a high-profile environment like the Governor Awards, image is everything. Visibility is currency. To be ignored, erased, rendered invisible in front of the entire industry is not just embarrassment. It is a threat to one's entire narrative. Meghan realized, viscerally, that her image was under attack. Not through words, not through confrontation, but through deliberate inaction. She tried reasoning with herself. Perhaps they didn't recognize her. Perhaps they were distracted. Perhaps a camera would shift unexpectedly, capturing her grace and elegance for a fleeting second. But deep down, she knew better. This was not oversight. It was not coincidence. It was coordination. Someone, somewhere, had orchestrated her exclusion. And the photographers, skilled professionals, were executing the plan flawlessly. The irony was cruel. For years, Meghan had been a master of visibility. She understood the mechanics of influence, the power of public image, the delicate balance of optics in every environment she entered. She had built a personal brand, cultivated relationships, and strategically positioned herself at the intersection of celebrity, royalty, and media attention. Yet here, at the red carpet of one of the industry's most prestigious events, all of that expertise failed to shield her. Her first tear appeared almost involuntarily. Not dramatic, not performative, just a quiet, trembling testament to the weight of the moment. She blinked quickly, refusing to let anyone notice, but the sting of vulnerability was there, undeniable. She was alone, surrounded by people, yet entirely isolated. It was the cruelest form of rejection. The kind that leaves no trace of confrontation, no argument to engage, only a silent, unyielding erasure. Meghan's mind raced. Who was behind this? Was it the event organizers? A rival celebrity? Someone from the production team? Or was it a coordinated effort among multiple players, each ensuring that she could not command attention? The uncertainty, the ambiguity, was almost worse than the rejection itself. Because when the source of your humiliation is invisible, your ability to defend yourself is gone. You are powerless against forces you cannot name. Her publicist continued to whisper instructions, a lifeline in the chaos. Step to the left. Pose slightly forward. Smile. Keep moving. It will be okay. But Meghan knew it wasn't okay. It would never be okay if the cameras continued to ignore her, if the industry chose to erase her presence, if the careful narrative she had constructed crumbled before her eyes. She moved again, seeking a fleeting opportunity. Another photographer, another angle, another chance to reclaim some recognition. But the subtle blockade persisted. Staffers shifted imperceptibly, photographers angled lenses away, whispers spread through the crowd. Each attempt to assert visibility was met with invisible resistance. It was a game she had never played before, a game of social exclusion in plain sight, a battle where the rules were unknown and the stakes were humiliatingly high. By this point, Meghan's emotional armor was cracking. The forced smile, the careful steps, the rehearsed gestures, all began to falter. Her heart pounded, her chest tightened, her throat constricted with the tension of exclusion. She realized that this was no ordinary evening, no casual oversight, no minor misstep. This was an intentional, orchestrated effort to control perception, to dictate the narrative, to assert power over who could be seen and who would be erased. And the realization brought with it a rising fear. If she could be excluded here, in this public, high-profile, global event, what did that mean for her reputation? For her influence? For her ability to navigate the industry on her own terms? It was a question that would haunt her long after the cameras finally left the red carpet. A question that underscored the fragility of visibility in a world obsessed with image and perception. Yet, despite the rising panic, despite the mounting humiliation, Meghan pressed on. Step by step, smile by smile, she continued down the carpet, refusing to allow the invisible blockade to define her entirely. Every motion was an act of defiance, a refusal to surrender, a declaration that she would not vanish quietly. And in that determination, she found a fragile sliver of control, small, fleeting, yet crucial. But as she continued, one thought lingered, unshakable. This blockade was not temporary. This wasn't a minor hiccup. This was a statement, deliberate in its execution. And as the crowd flowed around her, as cameras angled away, and as whispers circulated just out of reach, Meghan realized the truth. Tonight, she was not merely ignored. She was actively, purposefully, systematically excluded. And the question remained, who had decided this, and why? Because what came next would make the exclusion even more public, and no one at the Governor Awards saw it coming. The words hit her like ice water. Not shouted, not angry, not dramatic. Just there. Cold. Casual. Calculated. What are you doing here? For words. Whispered, deliberate, and sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of the red carpet. Meghan froze mid-step, her mind snapping into overdrive. Who had spoken? Was it a celebrity? A staffer? A producer? Someone with the authority to make her presence on this meticulously organized carpet feel like a transgression? She had no answer, only the words echoing in her head, repeating, reverberating, becoming louder than the camera flashes, louder than the laughter and chatter around her. It was the kind of dismissal that doesn't just humiliate, it isolates. And in that moment, Meghan felt the full weight of exclusion. She had arrived expecting recognition, attention, even admiration. She had rehearsed every step, every glance, every gesture. She had visualized photographers shouting her name, flashes capturing her elegance, whispers of excitement circulating through the crowd. Instead, she was invisible. And now, someone had confirmed it with 4 words that would be seared into her memory. Her first instinct was disbelief. Surely, she thought, this was a mistake, a miscommunication. Maybe the staff didn't recognize her. Maybe the photographer hadn't been instructed properly. Maybe, if she smiled wider, if she adjusted her pose, if she projected more charm, someone would finally acknowledge her. But the words echoed again. What are you doing here? There was no room for misinterpretation. Someone was actively rejecting her presence. Meghan's hands clenched subtly at her sides. She was aware of the world watching, aware that millions could see her now through live feeds, cameras, and social media streams. Yet in that instant, she felt small, almost invisible. Her carefully maintained composure began to crack. A subtle tremor in her lips, a blink she tried to hide, a fleeting tear she swiped away too quickly. These micro-expressions betrayed the storm inside her. For someone who had always been in control of her narrative, who had carefully navigated public appearances with precision, this was unfamiliar territory. She tried to continue forward, to reclaim some semblance of control. Step by step, smile by smile, she moved toward another photographer cluster, hoping that perhaps the first dismissal had been an anomaly. Maybe the cameras would recognize her. Maybe someone would correct the error. But as she approached, she realized the orchestration was complete. Photographers shifted their lenses, subtly repositioned themselves, even leaned toward colleagues as if to communicate, "Do not capture her." The exclusion was deliberate, calculated, professional. And every movement Meghan made to assert herself only highlighted her isolation. The crowd began to notice. Not in a hostile way, Hollywood is polite. But in whispers, sideways glances, subtle movements that created a social distance around her. Allies, if they existed, remained silent. Former friends and collaborators, who might have stepped in to diffuse the tension or redirect attention, seemed absent, distracted, or unwilling to intervene. It was a perfect storm of social and professional erasure. Meghan was alone in a sea of people, present yet entirely invisible. And yet, she pressed forward. Chin up, shoulders back, hands delicately poised, smile stretched across her face. Every gesture was an act of defiance. Every step an attempt to claim space she had been silently denied. She had faced criticism, rumors, and scandal before, but never this, the quiet, efficient, orchestrated dismissal of her very presence. The invisible power structures of Hollywood, which she had long navigated with skill and influence, had turned against her. The emotional spike was inevitable. A small tear, almost imperceptible, formed in the corner of her eye. She swiped it away quickly, fearing the optics of visible vulnerability. But the emotional toll was more than just humiliation. It was betrayal, confusion, and the sudden realization that the system she had trusted, the network she had believed would support her, could be used to exclude her completely. She was learning the harshest lesson of celebrity life. Presence alone does not guarantee acknowledgement. Power, alliances, and invisible hierarchies dictate who is seen and who remains erased. Then came the moment that would define the night. A staffer, one of the event organizers known for orchestrating press and celebrity movement, stepped in front of her, not aggressively, but with unshakable authority. "I'm sorry," they said, voice calm, polite. "This area is restricted. Only approved nominees and honorees are permitted. No negotiation. No room for error." It wasn't rude. It wasn't confrontational. But the message was clear: you do not belong. Meghan's heart sank. Every inch of confidence she had cultivated, every plan she had made for a triumphant re-entry, was evaporating in that single interaction. She tried reasoning with herself. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps her name was misplaced on the list. Perhaps someone upstairs would intervene, recognize her importance, or at least correct the oversight. But the more she assessed the situation, the more she understood the truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone had orchestrated this exclusion, and the precision of the photographers, the staff, and the subtle social cues confirmed it. She was being deliberately, systematically removed from visibility. The whispers around her intensified, not in overt gossip, but in the subtle cues of the room. Staff murmuring instructions, photographers exchanging brief, coded words, celebrities subtly shifting positions. Every micro-interaction reinforced her isolation. The social choreography was flawless. She was on the stage, under the lights, dressed for success, yet completely erased from the narrative that the Governor Awards intended to project. Visibility, she realized, was not granted by presence alone. It was given by those who controlled perception. Her pulse quickened, and a wave of panic threatened to break through her composed exterior. Every instinct told her to retreat, to step back, to find a safe space away from the calculated isolation. But Meghan didn't retreat. She had never been one to surrender, never been one to allow circumstance to define her image. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, smile maintained. Every step was an assertion of defiance, an attempt to reclaim control in a situation designed to strip it away. Then came another whisper, this time louder, more precise, unmistakable. "She's not on the list." For words, casual, simple, final, they hung in the air with a weight that could crush confidence. She wasn't merely ignored. She wasn't a minor inconvenience. She was deliberately, professionally, systematically excluded. Her presence was unauthorized, her attempts at visibility futile, and her reputation momentarily at risk. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If she could be excluded here, in this carefully orchestrated public setting, what did it mean for her influence, her career, her ability to navigate the industry she had always known? What did it mean for her carefully curated public image, built over years of strategic appearances, media management, and personal branding? In that moment, the red carpet became more than a stage. It became a test of resilience, composure, and emotional control. And yet, Meghan pressed on. One step. Another step. Smile maintained. Every gesture deliberate. Every moment an act of defiance. Because though the photographers and staff could attempt to erase her, the determination to be seen, to reclaim narrative control, remained. She was learning, painfully and publicly, that visibility in Hollywood is granted, not demanded, and that exclusion can be executed with precision, subtlety, and social elegance that makes it nearly impossible to counter. By the time she reached the end of the main carpet, Meghan's composure had cracked slightly. Her shoulders had tensed, a few more tears threatened to fall, and the realization of orchestrated exclusion had settled fully in her mind. She was present but invisible, seen but unacknowledged, valued by no one in the room, and yet entirely dependent on them for recognition. And it was only the beginning. Because as Meghan continued toward the side corridors of the event, as she attempted to navigate the subtle labyrinth of cameras, staff, and social cues. One thought dominated her mind. This blockade wasn't temporary. This wasn't a minor oversight. This was intentional, and the full scale of what awaited her backstage, behind the cameras, and in the private corridors of power would test her in ways she had never imagined. But what came next would escalate the humiliation even further. And no one in the room saw it coming. Hollywood runs on lists. Invisible, unspoken, meticulously curated lists that determine who gets seen, who gets heard, and who commands the camera's attention. It's not talent alone that guarantees visibility, it's approval, permission, access. And Meghan Markle, stepping onto the red carpet of the 2025 Governor Awards, had just discovered the harshest reality of celebrity politics. She wasn't on the list. The moment the whisper reached her, "She's not on the list," everything clicked into place. The careful maneuvers of photographers, the subtle redirections of staff, the polite but insistent refusals to allow her into key spaces. All of it was orchestrated. Someone, somewhere, had deliberately ensured that Meghan Markle would not be captured, would not be highlighted, and would not dominate the narrative. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't an oversight. It was a strategic decision, executed flawlessly by the gatekeepers of visibility. Hollywood lists are rarely public. They are curated by production teams, publicists, and event organizers. They are informed by studio politics, sponsorship obligations, previous appearances, social relevance, and sometimes sheer personal vendetta. To be absent from a high-profile list like the Governor Awards meant exclusion, not for lack of talent, not for lack of elegance, not even for lack of popularity, but because the decision-makers had determined you would not appear. Visibility was a privilege, not a right. And Meghan, despite her years of experience, influence, and celebrity status, had been denied that privilege. The first pang of realization hit her mid-step as she approached another cluster of photographers. She raised her hand in the carefully practiced wave, offered her signature smile, and angled her body toward the lights. Nothing happened. The lenses adjusted subtly, capturing other attendees, ignoring her entirely. She tried to engage verbally, offering a soft greeting, hoping to draw acknowledgement. Silence. Then the whisper again, "She's not on the list." Those 4 words, repeated in her mind, carried more weight than any public insult, any tabloid headline, any whisper of scandal. They were final, precise, and devastating. Her pulse quickened, and a wave of frustration surged through her. How had she been excluded? She had meticulously prepared for this night. She had anticipated the energy of the room, the placement of photographers, the likely flow of attention. She had rehearsed every angle, every expression, every gesture. Yet, none of that mattered. The list controlled the outcome. The invisible network of decision-makers, sitting behind the scenes, had made a choice. Meghan would not be part of the photographable narrative. And it wasn't just about the cameras. In Hollywood, lists dictate opportunity. They determine interviews, press coverage, media placement, and ultimately, public perception. To be absent from the approved photography list was to be excluded from the story that mattered. The public would see the Governor Awards unfold, but Meghan's presence, her preparation, her elegance, all would be invisible. She had arrived ready to reclaim influence, and instead, she found herself erased. Her publicist leaned in, whispering advice that felt increasingly futile. "Step here. Smile there. Maybe the next cluster will notice you." Meghan forced herself to comply, forcing a smile, angling her body, moving with measured grace. But with each step, each attempt to reclaim visibility, the barriers grew more apparent. Staff subtly redirected her, photographers shifted their lenses, and whispers circulated through the crowd. Every movement she made only underscored her exclusion. The emotional toll was immediate. A tear formed at the corner of her eye, quickly blinked away. The humiliation of being visible but ignored, present but erased, was almost unbearable. She had faced criticism, rumors, and public scrutiny before. But this deliberate exclusion, was different. It was silent, invisible, efficient, and inescapable. And the cruelest part? She could see everything happening around her. Other celebrities were photographed, acknowledged, celebrated. She was dressed for success, prepared to command attention, yet deliberately left out of the narrative. Meghan's mind raced. Who had the authority to make this decision? Was it the event organizers? A studio executive? A rival celebrity? Someone orchestrating the entire red carpet experience to ensure her exclusion? The uncertainty, the ambiguity, only amplified the humiliation. She was powerless, navigating a carefully constructed environment where every step, every gesture, every attempt at visibility was anticipated and countered. The list controlled her fate, and she had no insight into its authors or motives. The irony was brutal. Meghan had built her public persona on visibility, influence, and strategic control. She understood the mechanics of celebrity, the delicate balance of optics, and the power of narrative. Yet here, on one of the most high-profile nights of the year, the very system she had once mastered was now working against her. The cameras that had once captured her every move, the staffers and organizers who had once facilitated her visibility, were now agents of her exclusion. And as she continued down the red carpet, attempting to reclaim a foothold, the whispers intensified. Staff moved with subtle precision. Photographers exchanged brief coded words, and attendees shifted positions to maintain the visual hierarchy. Meghan realized the list wasn't just about control. It was about strategy, hierarchy, and power. Her absence was intentional, a signal to the industry that she was not part of the narrative, not worthy of visibility, not in the inner circle. Her pulse quickened, anxiety mounting. Every step felt heavier. Every glance around the room reminded her that she was present yet invisible. She had prepared for public scrutiny, yes, but not for systematic erasure. She had rehearsed for attention, for admiration, for acknowledgement. Yet the invisible gatekeepers had denied her all of it. The list controlled everything. Who would be seen, who would be photographed, who would dominate the story. And Meghan was absent. And then came the whispers from the edge of the carpet, subtle but unmistakable. She's not on the list. Not approved. Not authorized. The words repeated in her mind, echoing louder than any flash, louder than any cheer. The finality of it was undeniable. She wasn't just ignored. She wasn't just blocked. She had been systematically erased. The night she had envisioned as a return to prominence, a reclaiming of influence, a triumphant entry into Hollywood's elite, had collapsed. She was powerless against forces she could neither see nor name. A small, nearly imperceptible tear traced her cheek. She swiped it away, forcing composure, forcing poise, forcing grace. But internally, the storm raged. The meticulous preparation, the rehearsal, the careful curation of outfit and posture, all meaningless against the invisible network that had decided she would not be acknowledged. She realized, with painful clarity, that Hollywood's hierarchies were absolute. Visibility was granted, not demanded, and she had been denied. Despite the emotional upheaval, Meghan pressed forward. Every step, every gesture, every carefully maintained smile was an act of defiance. She would not retreat. She would not surrender. She would continue to navigate the labyrinth of photographers, staff, and invisible rules, even as the system worked relentlessly against her. But the realization weighed heavily. Tonight, she was not merely unwelcome. She was erased, excluded, invisible. And the question that haunted her, who had orchestrated this, and why, remained unanswered. Because what came next, behind the cameras and out of public view, would escalate the humiliation, challenge her composure, and reveal the true scale of the orchestrated exclusion. And no one anticipated how far it would go. When Hollywood turns on someone, it happens quietly, then all at once. That night at the Governor Awards, Meghan Markle discovered the full truth of those words. The red carpet had already tested her poise, her public image, and her carefully cultivated confidence. The subtle blockades, the photographer's deliberate avoidance, the whispered declaration that she was not on the list, all of it had left her isolated in plain sight. But the events of the evening were only the beginning. Behind the flashing cameras and the orchestrated glitz, the industry was preparing a larger, more consequential response to her presence. And Meghan, for all her experience navigating media storms, was about to realize just how far the tides of Hollywood politics could turn against a single person. It started with small signs, subtle shifts in conversation, glances exchanged between producers and publicists as she walked by. quietly murmured comments that seemed innocuous but carried the unmistakable tone of disapproval. Meghan noticed the patterns immediately. The way seasoned insiders communicated without words, how alliances could be signaled with nothing more than a tilt of the head or a whisper in the ear. Every movement, every interaction on that red carpet was a test of social power, and Meghan was suddenly on the losing side. She tried to maintain her composure, forcing the smile that had carried her through countless public appearances. She attempted to engage with a few acquaintances, people she believed would offer reassurance or perhaps an ally in her moment of exclusion. But even those connections faltered. Conversations were short, distracted, and overly polite, lacking the warmth she had expected. Former collaborators, individuals who had once been close, seemed to step aside, leaving her alone in a sea of recognition that had deliberately turned away. Then came the subtle escalation. In Hollywood, the social landscape is built on influence and perception. The red carpet was a public display of hierarchy, and Meghan was discovering the consequences of being excluded from it. What began as polite avoidance and discreet whispers escalated into overt patterns of exclusion. Photographers pivoting their attention before she could enter frame, reporters asking her colleagues for commentary rather than speaking to her directly, and assistants quietly moving her aside under the guise of event protocol. Every measure was precise, calculated, and designed to reinforce her outsider status. The emotional toll was immediate and intense. Meghan could feel it in her chest, a tightening that matched the pressure building in the room. She had faced scrutiny before, both as a public figure and as a member of the royal family, but this felt fundamentally different. This wasn't criticism from the press or whispers in tabloids.